"Impossible shot," General Williams muttered, lowering his binoculars with undisguised contempt. 4,200 meters in these conditions? Ma'am, this isn't some Hollywood fantasy. Even our best snipers struggle past 3,000. Sarah Chen stood motionless behind the firing line, her civilian hiking boots planted firmly on the concrete pad, weathered hands steady as mountain stone. The wind gauge showed gusting crosswinds at 35 knots and morning fog still. Clung to the distant ridgeline where a target the size of a dinner plate waited in the thin Colorado air. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't offer credentials or explanations. She simply adjusted her scope with movements so precise they seemed rehearsed, chambered a single round, and settled into a shooting position that made every observer fall silent. The crack of the rifle split the mountain air like thunder. 4.7 seconds later, the digital display flashed red. Dead center, perfect hit. The general's coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the observation deck concrete, because the system hadn't just confirmed an impossible shot. It had registered a precision rating that belonged in record books, achieved by someone whose name didn't appear on any roster, any team listing, or any official documentation. Anywhere in the military database. The morning air at Fort Riverside tasted like pine needles and anticipation, carrying the metallic bite of high altitude that made every breath feel earned. Situated 8,000 feet above sea level in the Colorado Rockies, the advanced training complex sprawled across 40 square miles of some of the most challenging terrain the military had access to. The facility specialized in extreme conditions training, where thin air, unpredictable weather, and brutal geography separated the capable from the exceptional. Echo Range represented the crown jewel of Fort Riverside's capabilities. The long-distance precision facility stretched across a natural valley that provided shooting lanes extending beyond 5,000 meters, with targets positioned at elevation. Changes that challenged both equipment and operator in ways that no flat-ground range could replicate. The morning sun painted the distant peaks in shades of gold and amber, while shadows still pooled in the valleys where morning fog lingered like smoke from some ancient campfire. The range complex itself looked like something from a science fiction movie, all brushed steel and reinforced concrete, built to withstand both Colorado weather and the punishment of high-powered rifles fired in rapid succession. The main observation deck jutted out from the mountainside like the bridge of a warship, offering unobstructed views of the entire valley through reinforced glass that could stop armor-piercing rounds. Below, the firing positions were carved directly into the rock face, creating natural wind breaks while maintaining sight lines that seemed to stretch forever. Digital displays throughout the facility showed real-time atmospheric conditions that changed moment by moment in the mountain environment. Wind speed and direction at multiple elevations, temperature gradients that affected bullet flight, humidity levels that influenced powder burn rates, and barometric pressure readings that could make the difference between a perfect shot and a complete miss. The technology was impressive, but everyone who worked at Echo Range understood that all the equipment in the world meant nothing without the human element that could read conditions, adapt to changes, and execute under pressure. The annual inter-service precision competition had drawn shooters from every branch of the military, along with select civilian contractors and law enforcement specialists, who had earned invitations through demonstrated excellence at shorter ranges. The competition wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about proving capability under conditions that simulated the worst-case scenarios operators might face in hostile territory, where a single shot could determine mission success or catastrophic failure. Registration had opened at 0600 hours in the main administrative building, a utilitarian structure that prioritized function over form in typical military fashion. Fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead, casting that particular institutional glow that made everyone look either exhausted or slightly ill. The smell of industrial coffee mixed with the lingering aroma of gun oil and cleaning solvents that seemed permanently embedded in any facility where serious shooting took place. Somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic crack of rifles provided a steady soundtrack that had become as familiar as breathing to anyone who spent time at Echo Range. The registration queue moved with military efficiency, each participant processed through a system designed to verify credentials, confirm equipment compliance, and assign firing positions based on classification and clearance levels. Shooters in various uniforms clustered in small groups, some reviewing range cards and atmospheric data, others checking and rechecking equipment that represented thousands of hours of practice and tens of thousands of dollars in precision engineering. Sergeant Jake Morrison managed the intake process with the casual competence of someone who had seen enough competitions to know exactly how each one would unfold. 38 years old, built like a marathon runner with the kind of steady hands that came from 20 years of competitive shooting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His duty uniform was pressed in regulation, bearing the marksmanship instructor badges that marked him as one of the range's senior personnel. A coffee mug proclaimed him world's okayest range master in fading letters, and his expression suggested he was comfortable with that level of modest ambition. Behind him, Corporal Lisa Rodriguez coordinated equipment checkout and verification, her laptop displaying a complex spreadsheet that tracked everything from rifle specifications to ammunition lot numbers. She had the methodical attention to detail that made precision shooting possible, understanding that at extreme ranges, variables that seemed insignificant could compound into complete failure. Her workspace was organized with the kind of precision that reflected her approach to everything military-related. The morning's registration proceeded smoothly until approximately 08:15, when someone entered who didn't fit the usual pattern. Sarah Chen pushed through the heavy glass doors with an economy of movement that suggested comfort in institutional environments, though not necessarily military ones. Early 40s, medium height, with the lean build of someone who stayed in excellent physical condition without making it the center of their identity. Her clothing was civilian but practical, outdoor gear that had seen genuine use rather than suburban hiking trails. She wore well-broken hiking boots that showed scuff marks from actual mountain terrain, cargo pants in earth tones that weren't trying to imitate military patterns, and a fleece jacket that looked warm enough for Colorado mornings, but light enough for afternoon sun. A small day pack hung from one shoulder with that particular balance that suggested someone who understood weight distribution and long carries. Everything about her appearance was carefully unremarkable, the kind of person who could disappear into a crowd of outdoor enthusiasts without drawing a second glance. Her approach to the registration desk was direct but unhurried, with the confidence of someone who belonged wherever they decided to be. No military bearing, no obvious deference to rank or authority, just the quiet self-assurance of someone comfortable in their own skin. When she reached Sergeant Morrison's station, she produced a laminated identification card that looked official enough to pass casual inspection, though the typography seemed slightly off, like it had been printed on equipment that wasn't quite calibrated correctly. Morrison glanced at the card without really seeing it, his attention already moving to the next name on his list. Sarah Chen, civilian contractor, he read aloud, fingers moving across keys that had seen better decades. You here for the observer program or the equipment demonstration? The question carried the assumption that civilians at precision competitions were either there to learn something or sell something, rarely to actually compete at levels that mattered. Sarah shook her head with the patience of someone who had navigated bureaucratic assumptions before. Competition registration, long-range division. The statement was simple and direct, without elaboration or justification, as if her presence at a military precision competition was the most natural thing in the world. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly as he scrolled through his database, looking for her name among the pre-registered participants. "I'm not showing you in the system. You sure you submitted all the qualification documentation? Competition shooters need verified scores at known distance ranges, plus military or law enforcement credentials for the extreme range categories." His tone remained professional, but carried this subtle implication that she had probably missed some critical step in the registration process. "Special entry authorization," Sarah replied, producing a second document that looked more official than her identification card. The paper had the weight and texture of government letterhead, with seals and signatures that suggested someone with significant authority had approved her participation. Morrison examined it more carefully this time, noting security features that were difficult to counterfeit and authorization codes that appeared legitimate. Behind Sarah, the registration queue had begun to back up as other participants waited their turn. Private Tommy Barnes, 22 years old and built like the high school linebacker he'd been 3 years earlier, shifted his weight from foot to foot while checking his phone. His shooting jacket was new enough to still show crease marks. From the package and his equipment case bore the logos of sponsors he hoped would notice his performance. Next to him, Private Alex Carter carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never encountered a challenge he couldn't overcome through natural talent and aggressive determination. Captain David Mitchell had positioned himself near the equipment verification station, where he could observe the registration process while maintaining the appearance of reviewing his own paperwork. Late 30s, regulation haircut that probably cost more than most enlisted personnel made in a week, with the kind of pressed uniform that suggested he spent more time in offices than field environments. His shooting credentials were legitimate but recent, earned through dedicated practice rather than natural ability, and his presence at the competition represented an opportunity to prove himself among peers who measured competence differently than promotion boards. The equipment verification process revealed Sarah's first deviation from expected patterns. While other competitors wheeled in hard cases containing custom-built precision rifles worth more than most people's cars, she produced a soft case that looked like something purchased at a sporting goods store. The rifle inside was clean and well-maintained, but appeared completely standard. No custom barrel work, no specialized stocks, no optics that cost more than a semester of college tuition. Just a quality hunting rifle that looked capable, but unremarkable. Corporal Rodriguez examined the weapon with professional thoroughness, checking serial numbers, measuring barrel length, and verifying that all components met competition specifications. "Standard hunting configuration," she noted aloud, more for her own records than for Sarah's benefit. "You planning to compete in the tactical class or precision division?" The question carried subtle surprise that someone would attempt long range precision shooting with equipment that most competitors would consider inadequate for the challenge. "Precision division," Sarah confirmed, accepting the verification paperwork that would allow her access to the firing line. "Extreme range category." The addition of the extreme range specification caused several nearby competitors to glance in her direction with expressions ranging from curiosity to amusement. Extreme range at echo range meant targets beyond 4,000 meters, distances where atmospheric conditions became as important as marksmanship fundamentals, and where equipment limitations could make success virtually impossible. Barnes nudged Carter with an elbow that probably left a bruise, his stage whisper carrying clearly across the registration area. "Think she knows extreme range means actual long distance? Not just the far end of a deer hunting lease." The comment drew chuckles from several other young competitors, who had spent months preparing for the competition with equipment specifically designed for the challenge they were about to face. Carter grinned back with the casual cruelty that passed for humor among people who had never been held accountable for their assumptions. Maybe she thinks she's signing up for some kind of educational demonstration. You know, like when they bring civilians out to watch artillery training so they can appreciate what the military does. His tone carried just enough condescension to be insulting without crossing into openly disrespectful territory. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez had been observing the registration process from her position near the equipment checkout station. 45 years old, with the kind of weathered competence that came from 2 decades of military service in environments that demanded excellence. Her instructor credentials were earned through demonstrated ability rather than classroom theory. And her reputation among precision shooters extended well beyond Fort Riverside. She had seen enough competitions to recognize patterns, both in equipment choices and competitor behavior, that often predicted performance before the first shot was fired. Standard hunting rifle for extreme range precision, she commented to Specialist Kevin Park, who was monitoring the electronic registration system from behind a laptop that looked like it had survived several deployments. Either she's completely out of her depth, or she knows something about shooting that doesn't show up in equipment catalogs. Park nodded absently, his attention focused on database entries that tracked every competitor's credentials and qualification scores. The morning sun had climbed high enough to burn off most of the valley fog, revealing the full scope of Echo Range's challenge. The extreme range targets were positioned on a ridgeline that rose nearly 1,000 feet above the firing positions, creating shooting angles that required compensation for both distance and elevation. Between the firing line and the targets, the valley floor presented a complex terrain of rock formations, scattered vegetation, and thermal currents that would affect bullet flight in ways that changed throughout the day. Wind flags positioned at intervals along the range showed the complex air currents that made extreme range shooting as much art as science. Near the firing positions, morning thermals created updrafts that would carry bullets high. In the middle of the valley, crosswinds channeled through rock formations could push projectiles several feet off course. At the target end, downdrafts from the heated ridgeline created conditions that changed minute by minute as the sun angle shifted. Digital displays throughout the facility provided real-time atmospheric data, but experienced shooters understood that electronic readings were just starting points for the complex calculations required to hit targets at distances where bullets spent several seconds in flight. Temperature gradients, humidity changes, and pressure variations all affected trajectory in ways that required both theoretical understanding and practical experience to navigate successfully. General Marcus Williams had arrived at the observation deck with the punctuality that marked his approach to everything military-related. 58 years old, with the bearing of someone who had spent 35 years in positions where his opinions carried weight and his decisions affected other people's careers. His service record included command positions in multiple theaters, staff assignments at the highest levels, and a reputation for tactical competence that had earned respect even from subordinates who didn't particularly like his leadership style. Williams represented old-school military professionalism, where competence was demonstrated through consistent performance rather than flashy displays, and where respect was earned through decades of service rather than demanded through rank. Alone, his presence at the precision competition wasn't ceremonial. He was genuinely interested in marksmanship as both tactical skill and measure of military readiness, understanding that individual competence with precision weapons could determine mission success in environments where superior numbers or firepower weren't available. The general's morning briefing had included weather forecasts that predicted challenging conditions throughout the day. Wind speeds would increase as thermal currents developed, creating complex air movements that would test even experienced shooters. Temperature variations between the firing positions and target area would create density gradients that affected bullet flight paths. By afternoon, conditions would approach the limits of what most competitors could successfully navigate, regardless of their equipment or experience level. Interesting morning for extreme range work, Williams observed to Captain Mitchell, who had positioned himself nearby with the obvious intention of engaging in conversation with senior leadership. Atmospheric conditions are about as challenging as we see outside of winter storm systems. Should separate the capable from the merely confident pretty quickly. His tone carried the satisfaction of someone who appreciated challenges that revealed true competence rather than allowing success through favorable circumstances. Mitchell nodded with the enthusiasm of someone eager to demonstrate understanding of topics that interested his superiors. Yes, sir. The wind gradient readings show significant variations between firing position and target elevation. Most competitors will probably struggle with the compensation calculations, especially if they're relying primarily on ballistic computers rather than field experience. His response was technically accurate, but carried the slight stiffness of someone reciting learned information rather than speaking from personal experience. The first firing period was scheduled to begin at 0900 hours with competitors divided into groups based on classification and experience level. Extreme range shooters would fire last, after atmospheric conditions had been thoroughly documented and other competitors had provided baseline data for the day's challenges. Sarah had been assigned to the final group, along with military snipers, whose credentials included confirmed kills at distances that remained classified, and civilian contractors whose consulting fees reflected demonstrated capability in environments where failure carried fatal consequences. As the morning progressed and preliminary firing periods began, the complexity of Echo Range's challenge became apparent to observers and competitors alike. Even experienced shooters with premium equipment struggled with wind compensation at moderate ranges, their shots grouping well but consistently missing center mass due to atmospheric conditions that changed faster than they could adapt. The electronic scoring system recorded each shot with brutal honesty, displaying missed distances that represented the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure in operational environments. Private Barnes had drawn an early firing position in the intermediate range category, where targets at 1,500 meters tested fundamental marksmanship skills, without the extreme complexity of longer distances. His performance was competent but unremarkable, achieving scores that met military standards without approaching excellence. Each shot required significant time for wind reading and position adjustment, and his final group size reflected solid training rather than exceptional natural ability. Carter's shooting demonstrated similar competence within normal parameters, his scores consistent with someone who had dedicated significant practice time to marksmanship fundamentals. His equipment performed flawlessly, and his shooting positions were textbook correct, but his results lacked the precision that separated good shooters from exceptional ones. Both young soldiers had acquitted themselves professionally, achieving results that would serve them well in most military applications, but falling short of the standards required for specialized assignments. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez had been monitoring performance throughout the morning, taking notes on shooting techniques, equipment choices, and competitor behavior that revealed experience levels beyond what appeared in official records. Her observations would contribute to after-action reports that helped improve training programs and identify personnel with potential for advanced marksmanship assignments. She had seen enough competitions to recognize patterns that predicted success at extreme ranges, and most of what she observed suggested the afternoon's extreme range period would challenge even the most confident competitors. The atmospheric conditions that had been merely difficult during morning firing periods were developing into something approaching prohibitive as the sun climbed higher and thermal currents intensified. Wind speed readings at various elevations showed variations that would require constant adjustment throughout the extreme range period. Temperature gradients between firing positions and target areas had increased to levels that would significantly affect bullet flight characteristics. Humidity levels were dropping as mountain air dried, changing powder burn rates and muzzle velocities in ways that affected precision calculations. By 11:30 hours, when the extreme range period was scheduled to begin, conditions at Echo range represented the kind of challenge that separated theoretical marksmanship knowledge from practical shooting ability. The targets positioned at 4,200 meters appeared almost microscopic through spotting scopes, visible primarily as small dark squares against the rocky ridgeline background. Wind flags throughout the valley showed air currents, moving in different directions at different elevations, creating a three-dimensional puzzle that required both mathematical precision and intuitive understanding to solve successfully. General Williams had positioned himself at the primary observation point, where he could monitor both competitor performance and atmospheric conditions that would affect shooting throughout the afternoon. His interest in the extreme range period went beyond casual observation. Several of the competitors represented potential candidates for specialized assignments, where precision shooting skills could determine mission success, and their performance under challenging conditions would influence personnel decisions that affected operational readiness. The general's assessment of civilian participation in military precision competitions was generally skeptical, based on experience that suggested most civilian shooters lacked the disciplinary foundation and stress tolerance required for operational environments. Competitive shooting in controlled conditions, regardless of skill level, differed significantly from precision shooting under combat stress, where environmental factors, time pressure, and life or death consequences created challenges that couldn't be replicated in training scenarios. Sarah Chen had spent the morning observing other competitors and monitoring atmospheric conditions with the kind of focused attention that suggested professional interest rather than casual curiosity. Her position near the extreme range firing line allowed her to study wind patterns, thermal effects, and target visibility through conditions that changed constantly as the sun angle shifted. She took no notes, consulted no ballistic computers, and engaged in none of the equipment adjustments that occupied most serious competitors during their preparation time. When the extreme range period was called to commence, she approached her assigned firing position with movements that were economical without being hurried, confident without being showy. Her rifle remained in its soft case until the moment she needed it, and her preparation routine was notably brief compared to other competitors who spent significant time adjusting equipment, checking atmospheric readings, and consulting range cards that detailed ballistic calculations for various conditions. The equipment checkout station buzzed with activity as competitors prepared for the extreme range period. Specialist Park monitored the digital systems that tracked atmospheric conditions, his screens displaying data that updated every 30 seconds with wind speeds, temperature gradients, and barometric pressure readings that would influence bullet flight over the next several hours. The complexity of the information would have overwhelmed most civilian shooters, but the military personnel treated it as standard operating procedure for precision work in challenging environments. Captain Mitchell had positioned himself near the primary observation deck, where he could maintain visibility of both the firing line and the senior leadership, who would evaluate competitor performance throughout the afternoon. His shooting jacket displayed patches from various marksmanship schools and competitive events, credentials that represented years of dedicated practice and significant financial investment in pursuit of precision shooting excellence. His rifle case contained equipment worth more than most people's annual salary, custom-built components that had been fitted and tested to achieve the kind of accuracy required for success at extreme ranges. The captain's preparation routine was methodical and thorough, involving multiple equipment checks, atmospheric calculations, and range card consultations that reflected training received at some of the military's most advanced marksmanship schools. His ballistic computer contained programs that accounted for dozens of variables affecting bullet flight, and his scope adjustments were made with the precision of someone who understood that, at 4,000-meter distances, errors measured in fractions of degrees could result in misses measured in meters. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez had drawn a firing position 3 lanes down from where Sarah would be shooting, her equipment representing the kind of practical precision that came from decades of military experience rather than unlimited budgets. Her rifle was military issue, upgraded with components that improved accuracy without compromising reliability in field conditions. Her preparation routine was efficient and practiced, based on thousands of rounds fired in environments where equipment failure or miscalculation carried consequences more serious than competition scores. Gonzalez had noticed Sarah's approach to equipment preparation, or rather, her lack of the elaborate preparation routines that characterized most serious long-range competitors. While other shooters spent significant time adjusting scope settings, consulting atmospheric data, and making equipment modifications based on current conditions, Sarah simply removed her rifle from its case, performed a basic function check, and loaded a single round into the chamber. Her scope adjustments appeared minimal, suggesting either supreme confidence in her equipment zero, or a shooting approach that relied on factors other than technological precision. Private Barnes had been assigned as a spotter for one of the senior competitors, a role that allowed him to observe extreme range shooting techniques while contributing to the competition's success. His position behind the firing line provided an excellent view of shooter preparation routines and the complex calculations required for precision shooting at distances where environmental factors became as important as marksmanship fundamentals. The learning opportunity was significant, but his attention kept drifting to the civilian woman whose approach to extreme range shooting differed so dramatically from everything he had been taught about precision marksmanship. The morning's atmospheric conditions had been challenging but manageable for experienced shooters using appropriate equipment. As the sun climbed higher and thermal currents intensified, the difficulty level was approaching something that would test even the most skilled competitors. Wind speed readings showed sustained speeds of 25 to 30 knots with gusts exceeding 40, creating air movements that varied significantly between the firing positions and target areas. Temperature gradients had increased to levels that would affect bullet flight characteristics in ways that required constant recalculation and adjustment. General Williams had been briefed on the day's competitor roster, including the civilian contractor whose participation had been authorized through channels that weren't entirely clear to range personnel. His experience with civilian shooters in military competitions was generally disappointing, based on observations that most lacked the disciplinary foundation required for success under stress. Competitive shooting in controlled environments, regardless of skill level, rarely translated to the kind of performance required when precision shooting became a matter of operational necessity rather than recreational pursuit. The general's interest in the extreme range period extended beyond casual observation of marksmanship skills. Several competitors represented potential candidates for specialized assignments, where precision shooting could determine mission success in environments where conventional military advantages weren't available. Their performance under challenging conditions would influence personnel decisions that affected operational readiness and mission planning for scenarios that required individual competence rather than unit strength. Echo Range's extreme range. Targets had been positioned to create shooting challenges that simulated operational environments where precision shooters faced similar atmospheric conditions and target distances. The 4,200-meter range represented the outer limits of what most military snipers could reasonably expect to engage effectively, even with premium equipment and optimal conditions. Under the current atmospheric conditions, Achieving hits at that distance would require a combination of technical skill, equipment capability, and environmental reading that few competitors possessed. The target itself measured 18 inches square, approximately the size of a human torso at that distance, mounted on a steel frame that could withstand high-powered rifle impacts without damage. Electronic sensors surrounding the target area provided immediate feedback on shot placement, displaying hit locations on monitors throughout the observation area. The scoring system was unforgiving, measuring accuracy to fractions of inches and providing data that revealed the difference between near misses and center hits with brutal precision. Sarah's assigned firing position offered an unobstructed view of the target area, but also exposed her to the full complexity of the wind patterns that made extreme-range shooting so challenging. The position required shooting across a valley, where thermal currents created updrafts near the firing line, crosswinds in the middle distance, and downdrafts at the target end. Reading and compensating for these air movements required experience that came from thousands of rounds fired under similar conditions, or an intuitive understanding of atmospheric effects that couldn't be taught through classroom instruction. The firing line had been configured with electronic timing systems that provided each competitor with a specific window for shot execution. The time limits were generous enough to allow for atmospheric reading and position adjustment, but strict enough to prevent excessive delays that could affect range safety and schedule adherence. Most competitors would use the full-time allocation for final equipment, adjustments, and wind reading before attempting their shots. Corporal Rodriguez had positioned herself at the scoring station where she could monitor shot results and coordinate with range safety personnel throughout the extreme range period. Her experience with precision competitions had taught her to recognize the difference between lucky shots and demonstrated competence, patterns that became apparent when shooters faced challenging conditions that revealed their true skill levels. The afternoon's atmospheric conditions would provide that kind of test, separating competitors who understood precision shooting from those who simply owned precision equipment. The first shooter in the extreme range rotation was a Marine Corps sniper whose credentials included confirmed kills in operational environments that remained classified. His preparation routine was deliberate and professional, involving atmospheric calculations that accounted for the complex wind patterns affecting the range. His rifle was a custom-built precision instrument designed specifically for extreme range work, equipped with optics that cost more than most people's cars and ballistic computers that processed dozens of variables affecting bullet flight. The Marine's shot was technically proficient and well executed, achieving a hit that placed within the scoring ring but several inches from center mass. The result represented solid competence under challenging conditions, but fell short of the precision required for specialized assignments where margin for error approached zero. His follow-up shots demonstrated consistent technique and equipment capability, but revealed the limitations that even experienced shooters faced when atmospheric conditions exceeded optimal parameters. Subsequent shooters achieved similar results, their performance reflecting high levels of training and equipment quality, while illustrating the difficulty of achieving precision under conditions that challenged even experienced professionals. Hit percentages remained within acceptable ranges for military standards, but center mass precision was rare enough to be noteworthy when it occurred. The electronic scoring system documented each shot with data that would contribute to after-action analysis and training program improvements. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez's performance represented the kind of practical precision that came from decades of military experience in environments where equipment had to function reliably under adverse conditions. Her shots achieved consistent accuracy that would serve well in operational scenarios, hitting within acceptable tolerances while demonstrating the kind of competence that came from understanding shooting fundamentals rather than relying solely on technological solutions. Her results were professionally satisfying without being exceptional, reflecting the steady competence that characterized senior military personnel. Captain Mitchell's shooting demonstrated the benefits of extensive training and premium equipment. His results achieving the kind of precision that justified the significant investment in specialized marksmanship education and custom equipment. His shots grouped tightly enough to indicate excellent technique and equipment capability, though atmospheric conditions prevented the kind of exceptional accuracy that would distinguish his performance from other well-trained competitors. His results were creditable and professional, representing the standard expected from officers pursuing specialized assignments. The pattern of results established through the first several shooters created expectations for the remainder of the extreme range period. Atmospheric conditions were challenging enough to test even experienced competitors, but not so severe as to make success impossible for shooters with appropriate equipment and training. Hit percentages remained within reasonable ranges, though. Center mass precision was limited to competitors whose experience included significant time under similar conditions. General Williams had been monitoring competitor performance with the kind of professional interest that came from understanding how individual competence translated to operational capability. The results he observed represented the expected range of performance from military personnel with various levels of training and experience, shooting equipment that ranged from standard military issue to custom precision instruments designed for specialized applications. Nothing he had seen exceeded the parameters of what he expected from well-trained military shooters under challenging but manageable conditions. When Sarah Chen approached her firing position, her preparation routine was notably different from what had preceded her. While other competitors had spent significant time consulting atmospheric data, adjusting equipment settings, and calculating ballistic solutions for current conditions, she simply checked her rifle's basic function and loaded a single round. Her scope adjustments appeared minimal, suggesting either extraordinary confidence in her equipment zero or an approach to precision shooting that relied on factors other than technological calculation. The contrast between her preparation routine and that of previous shooters was significant enough to draw attention from observers who had spent the afternoon watching elaborate equipment adjustments and atmospheric calculations. Her rifle remained obviously standard equipment, lacking the custom components and specialized accessories that characterized most extreme-range precision instruments. Her shooting position was competent but unremarkable, demonstrating solid fundamentals without the refined techniques that distinguished advanced marksmanship specialists. Private Barnes had positioned himself where he could observe Sarah's shooting technique, his curiosity about civilian capabilities in military competitions, creating interest that exceeded his assigned duties. His experience with precision shooting was limited to military training programs, but he had observed enough competitive shooting to recognize the difference between standard competence and exceptional ability. The civilian woman's approach to extreme-range shooting appeared to differ significantly from established military doctrine for precision marksmanship under challenging conditions. Specialist Park monitored the electronic systems that would record Sarah's shot results, his screens, displaying atmospheric data that continued to show challenging but manageable conditions for precision shooting. Wind speeds had stabilized in the 30 to 35 knot range, with gusts that occasionally exceeded 40 knots, but remained within parameters that experienced shooters could navigate successfully. Temperature gradients had reached their peak for the day, creating density variations that affected bullet flight but remained within calculation capabilities for shooters with appropriate training and equipment. The moment of shot execution arrived with the kind of focused attention that characterized significant events in competitive shooting. Sarah settled into her firing position with movements that were economical and practiced, her body alignment suggesting familiarity with precision shooting techniques despite her obviously civilian background. Her breathing pattern was controlled and deliberate, following established protocols for shot execution under stress. Her trigger control appeared smooth and consistent, indicating training that emphasized fundamentals over technological solutions. The crack of her rifle split the mountain air with authority that seemed disproportionate to her standard equipment, the sound carrying clearly across the valley despite wind conditions that typically muffled acoustic signatures. The shot execution appeared technically correct and professionally delivered, though observers couldn't immediately assess results due to the time required for bullet flight over extreme distances. Electronic systems began processing data that would determine shot placement and accuracy, information that would be available within seconds of bullet impact. General Williams had focused his attention on Sarah's shooting technique with interest that reflected professional curiosity about civilian capabilities in military precision shooting. Her approach had been notably different from military competitors, lacking the elaborate preparation routines and equipment modifications that characterized most serious extreme-range shooters. Her rifle and equipment appeared adequate but unremarkable, suggesting either limited resources or confidence in fundamental shooting skills rather than technological advantages. The electronic scoring system processed Sarah's shot with the same mechanical precision that had recorded all previous results. Sensors measuring impact location and displaying data on monitors throughout the observation area. The time delay between shot execution and results display created moments of suspended anticipation that characterized extreme-range shooting, where bullet flight time allowed for reflection on technique and atmospheric reading before learning whether calculations and execution had been successful. When the results appeared on the electronic displays, they created a moment of stunned silence that spread across the observation area like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. The scoring system showed a perfect center hit, placed with precision that exceeded anything achieved by previous competitors, despite atmospheric conditions that had challenged even experienced military snipers. The accuracy measurement indicated shot placement within margins that approached the theoretical limits of what was possible under current environmental conditions. Private Carter had been watching the results display when Sarah's score appeared, his expression shifting from casual interest to outright disbelief as he processed information that contradicted everything he thought he understood about precision shooting capabilities. The results suggested a level of competence that exceeded what should have been possible with standard equipment under current atmospheric conditions, achievement that placed her performance in categories reserved for the most skilled military precision specialists. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez recognized the significance of Sarah's result immediately, her experience with precision shooting providing context for understanding how exceptional the performance had been. Achieving center mass hits at 4,000 meters under current atmospheric conditions represented competence that very few military personnel possessed, requiring a combination of technical skill, equipment capability, and environmental understanding that took years to develop through operational experience. The silence that followed the results display was broken by General Williams' voice, carrying clearly across the observation area despite wind conditions that typically interfered with normal conversation. His tone reflected professional interest rather than surprise, suggesting familiarity with exceptional performance that exceeded normal parameters. The general's comment was directed toward Sarah but audible to everyone present, creating a moment that would be remembered by all participants in the afternoon's competition. Interesting shot placement, Williams observed, his voice carrying the kind of professional assessment that came from decades of experience with precision shooting in operational environments. Standard equipment achieving results that most custom precision instruments struggle with under these conditions. Would you care to explain your atmospheric reading technique? Or is this simply exceptional marksmanship fundamentals applied under challenging circumstances? Sarah's response was characteristically brief and direct, delivered without elaboration or justification for performance that exceeded normal expectations. Her tone remained professional and controlled, suggesting comfort with attention from senior military leadership and confidence in abilities that apparently transcended equipment. Limitations and training differences between civilian and military precision shooting approaches. Fundamentals, she replied simply, beginning to pack her equipment with the same economical movements that had characterized her preparation routine. Equipment capability matters less than understanding environmental effects and maintaining consistent technique under variable conditions. The technology assists but doesn't replace fundamental marksmanship skills developed through extensive practice under diverse atmospheric conditions. The explanation was technically accurate, but understated the exceptional nature of her performance, suggesting either modesty about remarkable achievement or familiarity with precision shooting at levels that made extreme range success routine rather than exceptional. Her preparation for departure was as efficient as her shooting preparation had been. Equipment secured and ready for transport within minutes of shot completion. General Williams studied Sarah with the kind of professional assessment that came from evaluating personnel for assignments where individual competence could determine mission success. Her performance had exceeded what he expected from civilian participants in military precision competitions, achieving results that placed her among the most skilled shooters he had observed regardless of background or training. The implications for operational capability were significant enough to warrant further investigation into her background and availability for specialized assignments. The afternoon's competition concluded with results that would influence personnel decisions and training program modifications based on demonstrated performance under challenging conditions. Sarah Chen's achievement stood out not only for its exceptional accuracy, but for the apparent ease with which she had exceeded the performance of military specialists using equipment designed specifically for extreme range precision shooting. Her success raised questions about civilian capabilities that challenged assumptions about the relationship between training, equipment, and performance in precision marksmanship applications. As the extreme range period officially ended and competitors began securing their equipment for transport, conversations throughout the observation area focused on the civilian woman, whose performance had exceeded all expectations for the day's competition. Private Barnes approached Specialist Park with questions about the electronic scoring system, wondering whether equipment malfunction might explain results that seemed to contradict everything he had been taught about precision shooting. Requirements and capabilities. Park's explanation of the scoring system's accuracy and reliability eliminated equipment error as a possible explanation for Sarah's exceptional performance, leaving only the uncomfortable conclusion that her shooting ability exceeded that of trained military personnel despite obvious equipment and training disadvantages. The implications were significant enough to generate discussion among range personnel who understood the rarity of achieving center mass hits under atmospheric conditions that had challenged even experienced military snipers. Captain Mitchell's analysis of the day's results reflected professional interest in understanding how civilian capabilities compared to military training standards, particularly when those capabilities exceeded what should have been possible under current conditions. His equipment and training represented significant investments in pursuit of precision shooting excellence, making Sarah's success with standard equipment particularly noteworthy from both technical and practical perspectives. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez had begun reviewing the day's shooting data with attention to patterns that might explain performance variations among competitors with different backgrounds and equipment configurations. Sarah's results stood out not only for their accuracy, but for their achievement despite factors that should have limited success at extreme ranges. The performance suggested either exceptional natural ability or training, and experience that exceeded what appeared in official documentation. General Williams remained at the observation deck as competitors departed. His attention focused on administrative details that would influence future competition policies and personnel decisions based on demonstrated capabilities. Sarah's participation had been authorized through channels that weren't entirely clear to range personnel, but her performance had been documented through electronic systems that provided undeniable evidence of exceptional marksmanship, ability under challenging conditions. The general's interest in Sarah's background and availability for specialized assignments reflected understanding that individual competence at her demonstrated level was rare enough to warrant investigation regardless of official military status. Precision shooting at extreme ranges under adverse conditions represented a capability that few personnel possessed, making her performance significant from operational planning perspectives that extended beyond competitive shooting achievements. As Sarah prepared to depart Fort Riverside, her interaction with range personnel remained professionally courteous but brief, offering no additional information about her background or training that might explain performance that exceeded normal expectations. Her equipment was secured efficiently and transported with the same economical movements that had characterized her entire approach to the day's competition, suggesting familiarity with environments where efficiency and discretion were valued. Over-elaborate displays. The documentation generated by her participation would become part of Fort Riverside's permanent records, creating an official record of civilian performance that exceeded military standards under challenging conditions. The implications for future competition policies and personnel recruitment would require review by officials whose clearance levels allowed access to information that might explain capabilities that transcended normal categories for precision marksmanship achievement. Private Carter's attempts to engage Sarah in conversation about her shooting technique were politely deflected with responses that acknowledged his questions without providing the detailed explanations he sought. Her discretion about training, background, and experience suggested either personal preference for privacy or professional requirements that limited disclosure of information that might explain exceptional capabilities demonstrated during the competition. Corporal Rodriguez completed the administrative requirements for competition documentation while noting irregularities in Sarah's participation that would require clarification through channels above her authorization level. The performance data was clear and undeniable, but the background information that should have accompanied such exceptional results was notably absent from official records available to range personnel. The electronic systems that had recorded Sarah's shot continued processing atmospheric data that would contribute to analysis of environmental factors affecting precision shooting throughout the day. Her achievement under conditions that had challenged experienced military personnel would become part of training databases used to develop improved instruction programs and establish performance standards for future competitions. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Echo Range, the day's events settled into the kind of routine documentation that characterized all military activities, despite results that exceeded normal parameters for civilian participation in precision shooting. Competitions. Sarah Chen had achieved something remarkable, departed without ceremony, and left behind questions that would influence policies and personnel decisions in ways that extended far beyond a single day's competitive shooting. The wind flags throughout. The valley continued their constant movement, responding to atmospheric conditions that made extreme range precision shooting one of the most challenging disciplines in military marksmanship. The targets remained in position for future competitions, ready to test other shooters who would attempt to achieve the kind of precision that Sarah had demonstrated with apparent ease under conditions that revealed the difference between good shooters and exceptional ones. General Williams' final assessment of the day's competition would include recommendations for policy modifications that reflected lessons learned from observing civilian capabilities that exceeded military training standards. The implications extended beyond competitive shooting to operational planning scenarios where individual precision shooting skills could determine mission success in environments where conventional military advantages weren't available. Echo Range returned to its normal routine as the sun set behind the Colorado peaks, but the day's events had created changes that would influence future training programs and personnel policies. Sarah Chun's visit had lasted only a few hours, but her impact on military understanding of precision shooting capabilities would continue long after her departure from Fort Riverside's mountain facility. The silence stretched across the observation deck like ice forming on a mountain lake, brittle and complete. General Williams found himself staring at the electronic display that showed Sarah's shot placement with a precision that defied rational explanation. The digital readout indicated impact within 2 inches of dead center at 4,200 meters, achieved under atmospheric conditions that had pushed even his most experienced snipers to their operational limits. The measurement wasn't just exceptional, it was approaching the theoretical boundaries of what ballistic physics suggested was possible under current environmental parameters. Captain Mitchell felt his carefully constructed confidence beginning to crack around the edges. His shooting jacket, adorned with patches from advanced marksmanship schools that had cost the Army tens of thousands of dollars, suddenly felt like costume jewelry worn to a diamond auction. His custom rifle, built by artisans whose waiting lists stretched years into the future, seemed inadequate compared to whatever Sarah had just accomplished with equipment that looked like it belonged in a hunting lodge rather than a precision shooting competition. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez had spent 23 years in the military, 15 of those involving some form of precision marksmanship training or instruction. She had seen gifted shooters achieve remarkable results under optimal conditions, witnessed near-miraculous shots executed under combat stress, and trained personnel whose natural ability exceeded what most people could achieve through decades of practice. But Sarah's performance transcended those categories entirely, representing a level of competence that existed in theoretical discussions rather than practical demonstration. The atmospheric conditions monitoring station continued its electronic documentation of environmental factors that should have made Sarah's achievement virtually impossible. Wind speeds remained in the 35-knot range, with gusts approaching 45, creating air movements that varied significantly across the 4,200-meter distance between firing position and target. Temperature gradients showed variations of nearly 15 degrees between the valley floor and target elevation, density changes that affected bullet flight in ways that required complex calculations to navigate successfully. Specialist Park found himself repeatedly checking the electronic scoring system, running diagnostic routines that confirmed the equipment was functioning correctly, and recording data with the accuracy that made Fort Riverside's competition results accepted throughout the military precision shooting community. The sensors surrounding the target area provided measurements that were precise to fractions of inches, eliminating human error or subjective assessment from results that would influence training programs and personnel decisions. Private Barnes had been attempting to understand Sarah's shooting technique through observation, but her approach differed so dramatically from military doctrine that he couldn't identify specific elements that might explain her exceptional performance. Her rifle handling was competent but unremarkable, her position adequate but not refined, her preparation routine minimal, compared to the elaborate calculations and equipment adjustments that characterize serious precision shooting. Yet somehow, these apparently ordinary elements had combined to produce results that exceeded anything he had witnessed. The target itself remained unmarked except for the single hole that marked Sarah's impact, a small puncture in steel that represented achievement few shooters could match regardless of their equipment, training, or experience level. The electronic sensors had registered the impact with data that would become part of Fort Riverside's permanent records, documentation that Sarah Chen had achieved precision shooting performance that placed her among the most skilled marksmen ever to use the facility's extreme range capabilities. General Williams had encountered exceptional personnel throughout his career, individuals whose capabilities exceeded normal parameters for their specialties. Combat veterans whose tactical instincts bordered on supernatural, intelligence analysts, whose pattern recognition approached prescience, Pilots whose aircraft handling transcended mechanical limitations through intuitive understanding of aerodynamic principles. But precision shooting at Sarah's demonstrated level represented a different category of exceptionalism, one that combined technical mastery with environmental awareness in ways that few people could achieve. The implications of her performance extended beyond competitive shooting to operational considerations that influenced mission planning and personnel assignment decisions. Precision shooting capabilities at extreme ranges under adverse conditions were rare enough that individuals possessing such skills represented strategic assets whose availability could determine the feasibility of operations that required surgical application of force rather than overwhelming military superiority. Corporal Rodriguez had been documenting the day's competition results with attention to performance patterns that would contribute to training program improvements and equipment evaluation reports. Sarah's achievement stood out not only for its exceptional accuracy, but for its accomplishment despite equipment limitations that should have prevented success at extreme ranges under current atmospheric conditions. The documentation would require explanatory notes that acknowledged performance that exceeded established parameters for civilian capabilities. The afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the western peaks, creating lighting conditions that would soon make precision shooting at extreme ranges even more challenging than atmospheric factors had already accomplished. Most competitions concluded extreme range periods before shadows began affecting target visibility, and thermal currents created additional complexity for environmental calculations. Sarah's timing had been optimal for achieving maximum difficulty while maintaining minimal equipment advantages. Private Carter had positioned himself where he could observe other competitors' reactions to Sarah's performance, noting expressions that ranged from disbelief to professional curiosity among personnel whose training and experience provided context for understanding how exceptional her achievement had been. The silence that followed her shot results suggested that even experienced military precision specialists recognized capabilities that transcended normal categories for marksmanship excellence. Captain Mitchell's analysis of Sarah's technique focused on identifying elements that might explain performance that exceeded his own despite significant advantages in equipment, training, and preparation time. His ballistic computer contained programs that processed dozens of variables affecting bullet flight, while her approach appeared to rely on observation and calculation methods that weren't obvious to trained observers. The disparity between technological resources and achieved results challenged assumptions about the relationship between equipment sophistication and shooting performance. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez had begun reviewing atmospheric data in search of environmental factors that might have contributed to Sarah's exceptional shot placement, though her experience suggested that current conditions were challenging enough to prevent rather than assist precision shooting at extreme ranges. Wind patterns showed the kind of complexity that required extensive experience to navigate successfully, while temperature and pressure variations created ballistic challenges that tested even advanced calculation methods. The electronic systems throughout Fort Riverside continued their automatic documentation of environmental conditions, equipment performance, and safety protocols that governed all range activities. Sarah's participation had been processed through the same administrative procedures that tracked all competition participants, though her background information remained notably sparse compared to military personnel whose service records provided detailed training and experience histories. General Williams found himself reconsidering assumptions about civilian capabilities in precision shooting applications, particularly when those capabilities exceeded military training standards despite apparent disadvantages in equipment and preparation resources. Sarah's performance suggested either exceptional natural ability or training and experience that weren't reflected in available documentation, possibilities that warranted investigation through channels that could access information beyond what range personnel were authorized to review. The wind flags positioned throughout Echo Range continued their constant response to atmospheric conditions that made extreme range precision shooting one of the most demanding disciplines in military marksmanship training. Sarah's success under current conditions represented achievement that very few personnel could match, regardless of their service branch, training background, or equipment quality. The rarity of such capability made her performance significant from operational planning perspectives that extended beyond competitive shooting considerations. As Sarah secured her equipment for departure, her movements maintained the same economical efficiency that had characterized her entire approach to the competition. No celebration, no acknowledgement of exceptional achievement, no apparent awareness that her performance had exceeded what most observers considered possible under current environmental conditions. Her preparation for departure was as professional and understated as her shooting preparation had been, suggesting familiarity with exceptional performance that made remarkable achievements routine rather than noteworthy. Specialist Park's review of the electronic records confirmed that Sarah's shot had been recorded with the same accuracy and reliability that documented all competition results, eliminating equipment malfunction as a possible explanation for performance. That challenged understanding of precision shooting capabilities. The data would become part of Fort Riverside's permanent archives, creating an official record of civilian achievement that exceeded military standards under challenging atmospheric conditions. The conversation among range personnel reflected professional interest in understanding how Sarah's approach to precision shooting differed from established military doctrine, particularly when her methods had produced results that exceeded what conventional training suggested was achievable. Her technique appeared to emphasize fundamental marksmanship skills rather than technological solutions, though the specific elements that enabled her exceptional performance weren't obvious to trained observers. Private Barnes had attempted to identify specific aspects of Sarah's shooting position, breathing pattern, or trigger control that might explain her superior performance, but her technique appeared competent without being exceptional in ways that distinguished advanced precision. Specialists. Her rifle handling was smooth and practiced, her position stable and consistent, her shot execution professionally delivered. Yet these apparently ordinary elements had combined to produce extraordinary results that exceeded established performance. Parameters. The target area remained under electronic surveillance that would continue monitoring environmental conditions and safety parameters throughout the remainder of the competition period. Sarah's impact point would be documented photographically and electronically, creating permanent records of precision shooting achievement that would influence training standards and equipment evaluation procedures for future Fort Riverside competitions and training programs. Captain Mitchell's assessment of the day's events would include analysis of performance, disparities between equipment quality and achieved results, particularly when civilian participants exceeded military specialists despite apparent disadvantages. In technological resources and formal training programs, Sarah's success challenged conventional understanding of the relationship between preparation, equipment, and performance in precision shooting applications that required both technical skill and environmental awareness. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez had begun preparing documentation that would contribute to after-action reports, analyzing the day's competition results, noting performance patterns that revealed the difference between adequate competence and exceptional ability under challenging conditions. Sarah's achievement would require explanatory comments that acknowledged civilian capabilities that exceeded military training standards despite obvious limitations in equipment and preparation resources. The administrative requirements for competition documentation continued through established procedures that created permanent records of all participant performance, though Sarah's results would require additional notation due to their exceptional nature and the questions they raised about civilian capabilities in precision shooting applications. Her participation had been authorized through proper channels, but her performance exceeded parameters that those authorization procedures had been designed to accommodate. General Williams remained at the observation deck as afternoon shadows began lengthening across the valley. His attention focused on implications that extended beyond competitive shooting to operational considerations involving personnel capabilities and mission planning requirements. Sarah's demonstrated ability represented a resource whose availability could influence the feasibility of operations requiring precision shooting under conditions where equipment advantages weren't sufficient to guarantee success. The electronic scoring system processed final data confirmations that would close the official records for the day's extreme range competition period, though Sarah's results would continue generating analysis and discussion long after the administrative requirements had been completed. Her achievement had created a new benchmark for civilian performance in military precision shooting competitions, one that would influence future policies and participation standards for similar events. As other competitors completed their equipment securing and departure preparations, conversations throughout the range facility focused on the civilian woman, whose performance had exceeded all expectations for precision shooting under challenging atmospheric conditions. The implications extended beyond the immediate competition to questions about training effectiveness, equipment requirements, and performance standards that govern specialized military assignments requiring exceptional marksmanship capabilities. Corporal Rodriguez completed the electronic documentation requirements that would transmit competition results to higher headquarters for analysis and permanent archival, though Sarah's performance would require additional reporting through channels that could access classification levels beyond those available to range personnel. The official records would show civilian achievement that exceeded military standards, but the explanations for such performance would require investigation by officials with appropriate clearance and access to information that might clarify her background and training history. The afternoon's events had concluded with results that would influence training programs, equipment procurement decisions, and personnel policies based on demonstrated performance that challenged conventional understanding of precision shooting capabilities. Sarah Chen had achieved something remarkable, documented through electronic systems that provided undeniable evidence of exceptional ability, then departed without explanation or acknowledgement of performance that would be remembered long after most competition results were forgotten. Fort Riverside's extreme range facility returned to its normal operational routine as the sun continued its descent toward the Colorado peaks, but the day's events had created changes in understanding that would influence future training and competition policies. Sarah's visit had been brief and professionally conducted, but her impact on military appreciation of precision shooting capabilities would extend far beyond the few hours she had spent demonstrating skills that transcended normal categories for marksmanship excellence. The wind patterns that had challenged every competitor throughout the day continued their complex movements across the valley, responding to thermal currents and pressure variations that made extreme range precision shooting one of the most demanding applications of military marksmanship training. Sarah had navigated these conditions with apparent ease, achieving results that would serve as a new standard for measuring exceptional performance under circumstances that revealed the difference between competent shooters and those whose abilities approached the theoretical limits of what human skill could accomplish. The revelation began not with fanfare or dramatic announcement, but with the quiet persistence of General Williams approaching Sarah as she methodically packed her unremarkable equipment. His career had taught him to recognize when something extraordinary masqueraded as ordinary, and Sarah Chen represented the kind of anomaly that demanded investigation regardless of protocol or conventional channels. Her performance had transcended competitive shooting to suggest capabilities that carried operational significance in environments where individual competence could determine mission outcomes. "Ms. Chen," Williams said, his voice carrying the authority that came from 3 decades of military command, yet tempered with genuine curiosity rather than interrogation. That wasn't beginner's luck or favorable atmospheric conditions. That was precision shooting at a level I've seen perhaps 3 times in my entire career, achieved under conditions that challenge shooters with 20 years of specialized training. I'd like to understand how civilian experience translates to performance that exceeds our military specialists. Sarah paused in her equipment securing, her hands stilling on the rifle case that had contained the instrument of her remarkable achievement. For a moment, the mask of civilian anonymity seemed to shift, revealing glimpses of something deeper that had been carefully concealed beneath the surface of unremarkable appearance and standard equipment choices. When she looked up to meet the general's gaze, her eyes held the kind of direct assessment that most people found uncomfortable, the penetrating evaluation of someone accustomed to reading situations and people with professional precision. "General Williams," she replied, her voice maintaining the same controlled modulation that had characterized all her interactions throughout the day, though now it carried undertones that suggested familiarity with military hierarchy and protocol that hadn't been apparent earlier. Sometimes the most effective training happens in environments that don't issue certificates or maintain official records. Experience gained through necessity tends to be more comprehensive than education received through institutional programs. The response was diplomatically phrased but substantively evasive, providing acknowledgement of exceptional capability without revealing the source or extent of that competence. Williams recognized the technique from briefings with personnel, whose backgrounds couldn't be discussed through normal channels, individuals whose service records existed in classified archives that weren't accessible to most military leadership. The implication was significant enough to warrant investigation through channels that could access information beyond what range personnel were authorized to review. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez had positioned herself within hearing distance of the conversation, her 23 years of military experience providing context for recognizing interactions that transcended normal civilian-military relationships. Sarah's response pattern suggested familiarity with operational security protocols and communication, techniques that weren't typically acquired through civilian shooting sports or hunting activities. The combination of exceptional shooting performance and apparent knowledge of military procedures created questions that warranted attention from officials with appropriate clearance levels. Captain Mitchell observed the exchange with growing awareness that his assumptions about civilian capabilities in precision shooting applications had been fundamentally incorrect. Sarah's performance hadn't been an anomaly or fortunate accident, but rather a demonstration of competence that exceeded his own despite significant advantages in equipment, training, and preparation resources. The implications challenged his understanding of the relationship between formal military education and practical shooting ability in ways that would influence his approach to future training and personnel development. Private Barnes had been attempting to process the disconnect between Sarah's unremarkable appearance and her extraordinary achievement, his military training providing limited context for understanding how civilian experience could produce results that exceeded what specialized military instruction typically accomplished. Her equipment remained obviously standard. Her technique appeared competent but unremarkable, yet the combination had produced precision, shooting performance that placed her among the most skilled marksmen he had ever observed. Specialist Park had been monitoring the conversation while completing administrative requirements for competition documentation, noting the general's obvious interest in Sarah's background and capabilities. The electronic records would show civilian achievement that exceeded military standards, but the explanations for such performance would require investigation by officials whose security clearances allowed access to information that might clarify her training history and operational experience. The afternoon sun had progressed far enough toward the western peaks to create lighting conditions that would soon make continued range operations impractical, though the day's significant events had already concluded with results that would influence policies and procedures long after the immediate competition had ended. Sarah's achievement would become part of Fort Riverside's permanent records, documentation that civilian capabilities could exceed military training standards under challenging conditions that revealed the difference between adequate competence and exceptional ability. General Williams studied Sarah with the kind of professional assessment that had served him well throughout a career involving personnel decisions that affected operational readiness and mission success. Her responses suggested background and experience that weren't reflected in available documentation, possibilities that warranted further investigation through channels that could access classification levels beyond those available to range personnel. The operational implications of her demonstrated capabilities were significant enough to justify additional inquiry regardless of normal administrative procedures. The kind of precision you demonstrated today isn't developed through weekend shooting or hunting activities, Williams continued, his tone remaining conversational while making clear that he wasn't prepared to accept superficial explanations for performance that challenged conventional understanding of marksmanship capabilities. That level of environmental reading and compensation requires extensive experience under operational conditions where precision shooting becomes a matter of survival rather than competition scoring. Sarah's response came after a pause that suggested careful consideration of how much information she was prepared to reveal, her expression remaining professionally neutral while her eyes seemed to evaluate the general security clearance and need-to-know status for information that might explain her exceptional capabilities. When she spoke, her words were chosen with the precision that characterized everything about her approach to the day's events. Experience has many sources, General. Some of the most effective training occurs in environments where failure carries consequences more serious than competition scores or career advancement. When precision shooting becomes necessary for mission success and personnel survival, the learning curve tends to accelerate beyond what institutional programs typically achieve. Her response acknowledged exceptional background without providing specific details that might compromise operational security or reveal information that wasn't appropriate for current circumstances. The diplomatic evasion confirmed Williams' growing suspicion that Sarah represented capabilities that existed outside normal military channels, possibly involving classified programs or specialized assignments that couldn't be discussed through conventional administrative procedures. His experience with such personnel had taught him to recognize the careful balance between acknowledgement and disclosure that characterized individuals whose service records were maintained in archives that officially didn't exist. Corporal Rodriguez had been observing the interaction while completing equipment verification procedures, her administrative responsibilities providing opportunity to note discrepancies between Sarah's documented civilian status and her apparent familiarity with military protocols and communication techniques. The combination of exceptional shooting performance and knowledge of operational security procedures suggested background that warranted investigation through channels that could access classification levels beyond those available to range personnel. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a figure who had been observing the day's events from positions that provided visibility without drawing attention to his presence. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Reeves moved with the deliberate purpose of someone whose authority derived from specialized knowledge rather than administrative rank, his appearance suggesting the kind of operational experience that came from environments where theoretical military training met practical application under conditions that demanded immediate competence. Reeves was 54 years old, with the kind of weathered competence that marked personnel who had spent careers in assignments that didn't appear on organizational charts or generate publicity for military public relations programs. His uniform was regulation but worn, bearing minimal identification that provided no indication of his specific duties or organizational affiliations. His approach to the group surrounding Sarah carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with situations that required discretion and professional judgment. "General Williams," Reeves said, his voice carrying the controlled modulation that characterized communications in environments where operational security was paramount. "Perhaps this conversation would be more appropriate in a setting that provides adequate privacy for discussions involving personnel whose backgrounds may require discretion regarding their training and experience histories." The suggestion was diplomatically phrased, but clearly indicated that Sarah's capabilities had attracted attention from officials with classification levels that exceeded those of range personnel. Williams recognized the implication immediately. His experience with specialized military programs, providing context for understanding when personnel capabilities exceeded what could be discussed through normal administrative channels. Reeves' intervention suggested that Sarah's performance had been observed by individuals whose responsibilities included monitoring for capabilities that might indicate background in classified programs or specialized assignments that required operational security protocols. Sarah's response to Reeves' arrival was subtle but significant, her posture shifting slightly in ways that suggested recognition of authority that transcended conventional military hierarchy. The change was minimal but noticeable to trained observers, indicating familiarity with individuals whose responsibilities involved oversight of personnel whose capabilities and backgrounds couldn't be discussed through standard military channels. "Chief Reeves," Sarah acknowledged, her tone carrying professional recognition that confirmed their previous acquaintance while maintaining the discretion that characterized all her interactions throughout the day. "I wasn't aware that Fort Riverside's activities included monitoring for capabilities that might indicate specialized backgrounds." Her response acknowledged his authority while subtly questioning the extent of surveillance that had apparently been focused on the day's competition. "Participants." Reeves' reply came with the measured precision that characterized communications involving classified information and personnel whose backgrounds required protection through operational security protocols. Exceptional performance tends to attract professional interest, particularly when that performance suggests training and experience that exceed what appears in official documentation. Some capabilities are rare enough to warrant attention regardless of the circumstances in which they're demonstrated. The exchange confirmed what General Williams had begun to suspect. Sarah Chen represented far more than a civilian shooting enthusiast whose natural ability had produced remarkable results under challenging conditions. Her performance indicated background and training that existed in the classified realm of military operations, possibly involving programs or assignments that required capabilities she had demonstrated through precision shooting that exceeded normal parameters for civilian or conventional military personnel. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez found herself witnessing an interaction that clearly transcended normal range operations and competition administration, her experience providing enough context to recognize when personnel discussions involved classification levels that exceeded her security clearance and need-to-know requirements. The conversation between Sarah, General Williams, and Chief Reeves carried implications that extended beyond Fort Riverside's training mission to operational considerations that involved specialized capabilities and personnel assignments. Captain Mitchell had begun to understand that his assessment of the day's events had been fundamentally incomplete, his focus on competition results and equipment performance having missed the larger significance of Sarah's participation and demonstrated capabilities. Her achievement represented more than exceptional marksmanship. It indicated background and training that placed her among personnel whose service couldn't be evaluated through conventional military standards or career progression models. The administrative requirements for competition documentation would continue through established procedures, but Sarah's participation would require additional reporting through channels that could access classification levels appropriate for personnel whose backgrounds and capabilities warranted discretion regarding their training histories and operational experience. Her achievement had been documented through electronic systems that provided undeniable evidence of exceptional ability. But the explanations for such performance would require investigation by officials with appropriate security clearances. Private Barnes had been attempting to understand the significance of the conversation developing around Sarah, his limited experience with classified military programs providing insufficient context for recognizing interactions that involved personnel whose backgrounds and capabilities existed outside normal administrative channels. The exchange between senior military officials suggested implications that extended beyond competition results to operational considerations that affected mission planning and personnel assignment decisions. Specialist Park completed the electronic documentation requirements that would close the official records for the day's competition, though Sarah's participation would continue generating analysis and reporting through channels that could access information beyond what range personnel were authorized to review. Her performance had created new benchmarks for precision shooting under challenging conditions, but the full significance of her achievement would require evaluation by officials whose responsibilities included oversight of personnel with specialized capabilities. As the conversation continued with the careful discretion that characterized discussions involving classified personnel and operational security considerations, the afternoon sun progressed toward the horizon, creating lighting conditions that marked the conclusion of Fort Riverside's competition activities. Sarah's equipment remained secured and ready for departure, though her interaction with General Williams and Chief Reeves suggested that her visit might have implications that extended beyond the few hours she had spent demonstrating exceptional marksmanship capabilities. The wind flags throughout Echo Range continued their constant response to atmospheric conditions that had challenged every competitor throughout the day, their movements providing visual confirmation of the complex environmental factors that had made Sarah's achievement so remarkable. Her success under conditions that had tested even experienced military specialists represented capability that warranted attention from officials whose responsibilities included identifying and utilizing personnel whose abilities exceeded normal parameters for specialized assignments. Corporal Rodriguez observed the developing situation with growing awareness that the day's events had significance that extended beyond her administrative responsibilities and security clearance levels. Sarah's participation had been processed through standard competition procedures, but her performance and the subsequent interest from senior military officials suggested implications that would require reporting through channels that could access classification levels appropriate for personnel whose backgrounds warranted operational security protocols. The conversation concluded with arrangements that would allow continued evaluation of Sarah's capabilities and background through channels that provided appropriate discretion for personnel whose service records existed in classified archives. Her departure from Fort Riverside would be delayed pending discussions that required privacy and security protocols beyond what range facilities could provide, indicating that her demonstration of exceptional marksmanship had attracted attention from officials whose responsibilities involved oversight of specialized military capabilities. General Williams' final assessment of the day's events would include recommendations for policy modifications that reflected lessons learned from observing civilian capabilities that exceeded military training standards, though the full implications of Sarah's performance would require evaluation through channels that could access information about her actual background and training history. Her achievement had challenged conventional understanding of the relationship between formal military education and practical shooting ability in ways that would influence future training programs and personnel policies. As Fort Riverside's competition concluded and participants began their departures, Sarah Chen's brief visit had created changes in understanding that would influence precision shooting standards and personnel evaluation procedures long after her departure. Her performance had transcended competitive achievement to suggest operational capabilities that warranted attention from officials, whose responsibilities included identifying and utilizing personnel whose abilities could determine mission success. In environments where individual competence exceeded unit strength in strategic importance, the electronic systems that had documented her exceptional achievement would maintain permanent records of precision shooting performance that established new benchmarks for civilian capabilities under challenging conditions. Though the full significance of her demonstration would require analysis through channels that could evaluate the operational implications of skills that exceeded normal parameters for specialized military assignments. Sarah Chen had visited Fort Riverside as an apparently ordinary civilian, achieved something extraordinary, and departed with questions that would influence policies and procedures in ways that extended far beyond competitive shooting to the classified realm of specialized military operations. The secure briefing room beneath Fort Riverside's main administrative building had been designed for conversations that couldn't take place in environments where electronic surveillance might compromise operational security. Steel-lined walls blocked electromagnetic signals, while acoustic dampening materials prevented sound transmission beyond the reinforced door that sealed the chamber from external monitoring. The room contained only a simple table, 4 chairs, and lighting that cast no shadows where sensitive documents might be photographed by concealed cameras. Sarah sat across from General Williams and Chief Warrant Officer Reeves, with the same composed demeanor that had characterized her entire day at Fort Riverside, though the change in environment had brought subtle shifts in her bearing that suggested comfort with security protocols and classified briefing procedures. Her civilian clothing remained unchanged, but her posture now reflected the kind of professional attention that marked personnel accustomed to discussions involving operational planning and mission-critical information. Reeves had activated the room's security systems with movements that indicated long familiarity with procedures designed to protect conversations from electronic monitoring and authorized disclosure. The chamber's isolation was complete, creating an environment where classified information could be discussed without concern for surveillance or inadvertent compromise of sensitive operational details. His preparation for the briefing suggested that Sarah's background warranted security protocols, typically reserved for discussions involving the most sensitive military operations. The demonstration you provided today wasn't coincidental, Reeves began, his voice carrying the controlled precision that characterized communications involving personnel whose backgrounds couldn't be discussed through normal channels. Precision. Shooting at that level, under those atmospheric conditions, with standard equipment, represents capabilities that very few individuals possess. The combination of technical skill and environmental awareness you displayed indicates training and experience that extend far beyond civilian shooting sports. Sarah's response came after a pause that suggested careful evaluation of how much information was appropriate to reveal in current circumstances, her expression remaining professionally neutral while her eyes assessed the security classification levels of both military officials present. Experience develops through necessity, Chief Reeves. When mission success depends on individual competence rather than unit strength, the learning curve accelerates beyond what institutional training typically achieves. Some skills are acquired in environments where failure isn't an option. The acknowledgement was diplomatically phrased but substantively significant, confirming Williams' growing suspicion that Sarah represented capabilities that existed outside conventional military channels. Her response patterns indicated familiarity with operational security protocols and communication techniques that weren't acquired through civilian activities, suggesting background in specialized programs or assignments that required the kind of discretion that characterized the most sensitive military operations. General Williams had spent enough time with classified personnel to recognize the careful balance between acknowledgement and disclosure that marked individuals whose service records existed in archives that weren't accessible through normal administrative channels. Sarah's responses suggested background that warranted investigation through channels that could access information about specialized military programs and personnel assignments that didn't appear on organizational charts or generate publicity for military public relations efforts. "Miss Chen," Williams said, his tone carrying professional interest rather than interrogation, "the precision you demonstrated today places you among perhaps a dozen individuals I've encountered in 35 years of military service. That level of capability typically develops through operational experience in environments where precision shooting becomes a matter of survival rather than competition scoring. I'm interested in understanding how civilian experience translates to performance that exceeds our most specialized military training programs." Sarah shifted slightly in her chair, a minimal movement that nonetheless suggested recognition of the general's authority and legitimate interest in capabilities that carried operational significance. Her response was measured and professional, acknowledging exceptional competence while maintaining the discretion that characterized personnel whose backgrounds required protection through operational security protocols. "General, some of the most effective training occurs outside institutional frameworks, in environments where theoretical knowledge must be immediately applicable under conditions that don't allow for mistakes or second attempts. When precision shooting becomes essential for mission completion and personnel survival, competence develops rapidly beyond what classroom instruction typically achieves." Her words were chosen with care, providing acknowledgement of exceptional background without revealing specifics that might compromise operational security or disclose information inappropriate for current circumstances. Reeves had been studying Sarah throughout the exchange, his experience with specialized personnel providing context for recognizing individuals whose capabilities exceeded what appeared in official documentation. Her responses confirmed his initial assessment that her performance at Fort Riverside indicated background in programs or assignments that required capabilities she had demonstrated through precision shooting that transcended normal parameters for civilian or conventional military personnel. "The kind of environmental reading you displayed today isn't developed through recreational shooting or hunting activities," Reeves continued, his voice maintaining the controlled modulation that characterized discussions involving classified information and personnel whose backgrounds warranted discretion. "Reading atmospheric conditions at that level requires extensive experience under operational circumstances where environmental factors must be calculated instantly and accurately, without technological assistance or extended preparation time." Sarah's acknowledgement came with the slight nod that indicated recognition of professional competence among individuals whose responsibilities involved oversight of specialized capabilities and personnel assignments. Environmental awareness develops through necessity, when mission parameters require adaptation to changing conditions without external support or technological solutions. Experience gained under those circumstances tends to be comprehensive and immediately applicable when similar conditions are encountered. The response confirmed what both military officials had begun to suspect. Sarah Chen represented capabilities that existed in the classified realm of specialized military operations, possibly involving programs or assignments that required the kind of precision shooting competence she had demonstrated at Fort Riverside. Her performance indicated training and experience that couldn't be discussed through conventional administrative procedures, warranting attention from officials whose security clearances allowed access to information about the most sensitive military programs. Williams recognized the diplomatic evasion from briefings with personnel whose service records existed in classified archives that weren't accessible to most military leadership, individuals whose capabilities and assignments couldn't be evaluated through normal career progression models or performance standards. Sarah's responses suggested a background that warranted investigation through channels that could access classification levels, appropriate for specialized military personnel whose service transcended conventional organizational structures. The precision you achieved today suggests familiarity with operational environments where individual competence determines mission success, Williams observed, his tone carrying professional assessment rather than interrogation. That level of capability development typically requires experience in assignments that don't appear in normal military records, possibly involving programs or operations that remain classified due to their sensitive nature or operational requirements. Sarah's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes seemed to evaluate the general security clearance and need-to-know status for information that might explain her exceptional capabilities. When she responded, her words carried the measured precision that characterized communications involving operational security and classified information. General Williams, some military operations require capabilities that can't be developed through institutional training programs, regardless of their quality or resources. Personnel selected for such assignments typically possess natural abilities that can be enhanced through specialized training, but the fundamental competence must already exist. Institutional programs can refine existing capabilities, but they rarely create exceptional performance where natural ability is absent. The response acknowledged exceptional background while avoiding specifics that might compromise operational security or reveal information that wasn't appropriate for current circumstances. Reeves recognized the communication technique from interactions with personnel whose backgrounds and assignments required protection through discretion and limited disclosure, even to senior military officials whose security clearances allowed access to most classified information. Your performance today attracted attention from officials whose responsibilities include monitoring for capabilities that might indicate background in specialized programs, Reeves explained, his voice carrying the professional courtesy that characterized communications between personnel who understood the requirements of operational security and classified assignments. Exceptional precision shooting under challenging conditions represents a capability that's rare enough to warrant investigation, particularly when that performance suggests training and experience that exceed what appears in available documentation. Sarah's response came after a pause that suggested careful consideration of how much information was appropriate to reveal, her expression maintaining the professional neutrality that marked personnel accustomed to discussions involving classified information and operational security requirements. Chief Reeves, I understand that exceptional performance generates professional interest, particularly when that performance suggests capabilities that might be useful for specialized assignments. However, some backgrounds require discretion that extends beyond normal administrative procedures, even when interacting with officials who possess appropriate security clearances. The diplomatic response confirmed that Sarah's background involved classification levels that required protection through operational security protocols, even during discussions with senior military officials whose responsibilities included oversight of specialized capabilities and personnel assignments. Her careful communication suggested experience with the kind of discretion that characterized the most sensitive military operations, where even acknowledgement of participation could compromise operational security or personnel safety. Williams had encountered similar responses from personnel whose assignments existed in the classified realm of specialized military operations, individuals whose service records were maintained in archives that weren't accessible through conventional administrative channels. Sarah's responses indicated background that warranted attention from officials whose responsibilities included identifying and utilizing capabilities that could determine mission success in environments where individual competence exceeded unit strength in strategic importance. Ms. Chen, Williams said, his tone carrying the professional respect that marked interactions with personnel whose capabilities exceeded normal parameters for specialized assignments. Your demonstration today suggests competence that would be valuable for operations requiring precision shooting under challenging conditions. If your background includes experience that might be applicable to current operational requirements, that information would be useful for planning purposes even if specific details must remain classified. Sarah's response reflected the careful balance between acknowledgement and disclosure that characterized personnel whose service involved the most sensitive military operations. General, I appreciate the professional courtesy, and I understand the operational significance of capabilities that can determine mission success under challenging conditions. However, some backgrounds require protection through discretion that extends beyond what current circumstances allow, even when discussing potential applications with officials who possess appropriate authority and security clearances. The response indicated that Sarah's background involved classification levels that exceeded what could be discussed during current circumstances. Despite the secure environment and the security clearances of both military officials present, her careful communication suggested experience with operational security requirements that protected personnel whose assignments and capabilities warranted discretion even among senior military leadership whose responsibilities included oversight of specialized operations. Reeves understood the implications of Sarah's diplomatic evasion, his experience with classified personnel providing context for recognizing when operational security requirements prevented disclosure of information that might otherwise be relevant to current military needs and operational planning. Her responses confirmed that her capabilities resulted from background in specialized programs or assignments that required protection through the highest levels of operational security and personnel discretion. The performance you demonstrated today will be documented through appropriate channels, Reeves explained, his voice carrying the professional courtesy that characterized communications with personnel whose backgrounds warranted discretion regarding their training and operational experience. Officials whose responsibilities include oversight of specialized capabilities will be informed of your demonstration and its implications for operational planning. Those specific details regarding your background will remain protected through appropriate security protocols. Sarah acknowledged the explanation with the professional nod that indicated understanding of procedures designed to protect classified personnel, while allowing their capabilities to be considered for operational applications. Her response was measured and diplomatic, maintaining the discretion that characterized all her interactions, while acknowledging the legitimate military interest in exceptional capabilities that could influence mission planning and personnel assignments. I appreciate the professional courtesy, Chief Reeves, and I understand the operational significance of documenting capabilities that might be relevant to specialized assignments. The demonstration today was intended to provide accurate assessment of precision shooting competence under challenging conditions, which has been accomplished through the electronic recording systems and professional observation by qualified military personnel. The conversation concluded with mutual understanding that Sarah's capabilities had been documented through appropriate channels while her background remained protected through operational security protocols that prevented disclosure of information that might compromise classified programs or personnel safety. Her departure from Fort Riverside would be coordinated through procedures that maintain discretion while allowing her demonstrated capabilities to be considered for future operational requirements. Williams and Reeves remained in the secure briefing room after Sarah's departure, their discussion focusing on the implications of her demonstration and the procedures required for reporting exceptional capabilities to officials whose responsibilities included oversight of specialized military operations. Her performance had transcended competitive shooting to suggest operational competence that warranted attention from the highest levels of military leadership, though her background would remain protected through the classification levels that governed the most sensitive military programs. The documentation generated by Sarah's participation at Fort Riverside would be transmitted through channels that could access information about specialized capabilities and personnel assignments that didn't appear in conventional military records. Her achievement would establish new benchmarks for precision shooting under challenging conditions while raising questions about civilian capabilities that challenged conventional understanding of the relationship between formal military training and operational competence. As evening settled over the Colorado mountains, Fort Riverside returned to its normal operational routine, though the day's events had created changes in understanding that would influence precision shooting standards and personnel evaluation procedures for years to come. Sarah Chen had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded military training standards, attracted attention from officials responsible for oversight of specialized operations, and departed with questions that would influence policies and procedures in ways that extended far beyond competitive shooting to the classified realm of military operations, where individual competence could determine the success or failure of missions that affected national security. The secure briefing room was deactivated and returned to standby status, its electronic isolation systems powered down until the next occasion when classified information required discussion in an environment protected from surveillance and unauthorized disclosure. The conversation that had taken place within its steel-lined walls would be documented through channels that maintained appropriate security classifications while allowing Sarah's demonstrated capabilities to be considered for operational applications that might require precision shooting under conditions where failure wasn't an option. General Williams' final assessment of the day's events would include recommendations that reflected lessons learned from observing capabilities that exceeded conventional military training standards, though the full implications of Sarah's performance would require evaluation through channels that could access information about her actual background and operational experience. Her visit to Fort Riverside had lasted only a few hours, but her impact on military understanding of precision shooting capabilities would continue long after her departure from the mountain facility. The electronic systems that had recorded her exceptional achievement would maintain permanent documentation of precision shooting performance that established new standards for measuring individual competence under challenging conditions. Though the full significance of her demonstration would require analysis through classified channels that could evaluate the operational implications of skills that transcended normal parameters for specialized military assignments. Sarah Chen had arrived at Fort Riverside as an apparently ordinary civilian, achieved something extraordinary that challenged conventional understanding of precision shooting capabilities, and departed with her background protected through operational security protocols that ensured her service record would remain in the classified archives, where legends were maintained rather than publicized. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.